The following stories were shared to our email. This goes to show you that not all romance scammers succeed, and sometimes they do leave empty-handed. George came into my life this past summer. I met him through IG. I follow the 90 Day Fiancé fan pages, and he commented on my comment about Angela and Michael, the couple with the man from Nigeria and she's from Georgia. I made a comment on how he finally got his visa to come to the USA, or at least it was a rumor that I had heard. George replied to my comment and left a heart react on my comment. George said he was happy with my comment. I didn't respond, as lots of people reply to comments on 90 Day Fiancé fan pages, some good and some not so good. I had a DM shortly after this from him. He said it was nice to meet me and his name was George and he was from Dallas, Texas. Well, I live in Brownsville, Texas. I said thanks, take care, as I wasn't really wanting to chit-chat with people from IG. Most times I would get spam messages and other junk in my DMs. Sometimes I would get hateful DMs about how they don't like this or that, so my DMs would never really get a reply most times. George kept writing. He started following me on IG. He wrote that he was 56 and single. In fact, he was a widow. His wife died 10 years ago, and he had a 12-year-old daughter named Lily. He asked where I'm from, and for whatever reason, I responded and said I live in Brownsville. His response to me was so odd. He asked me what country that is. Now, a Texan knows where another Texan is from, especially larger towns. In fact, my friends who live in North Texas always tease my friends who live in South Texas. It's just a thing. I asked him what he meant. He said, "What country is Brownsville near?" I thought maybe he misread what I typed, so I responded in caps and said, "Brownsville. I live in Brownsville." His response to me is that he has been there years ago when he visited France, and it's such a lovely country with lots of jobs and a strong economy. So my radar went up. I decided to give this a whirl and told him that yes, it's a great country, but the snow is so terrible year-round. He replied to that with, "Yes, dear, very cold." I asked him how Dallas is, and he said he wasn't there right now, that he was working in Yemen as an orthopedic surgeon. I asked him where your daughter is at. Well, you're over in Yemen. He said that she was in a top boarding school in Dallas. George said since his wife died, he's been very lost and lonely, and his daughter, who is 12, insisted that he join IG to find a wife. I told him that his daughter shouldn't dictate when or how he meets a woman, especially on social media. He said his daughter cries at night and cries all day screaming for a new mother. He said he's been searching for years. I told him that he should put his daughter in therapy if she's screaming and crying day and night and telling her father to find a random wife on social media. He told me he would take up my advice and be very stern with his daughter. This makes no sense. He then asked if I'm single, and I told him I'm not looking for anyone right now. He said that I must be extremely lonely and in desperate need of a husband. He then asked how many children I had and why my marriage ended. I told him I never said I was married. He asked me how many children I've had. The questions were ridiculous and invasive for asking a total stranger. I told him that he's a stranger to me. I do not know him. He told me that he is not a stranger since we've been talking all this time. I told George we've literally been chatting for less than 10 minutes. You're still a stranger. George pushed for my phone number, and I told him that I don't give my number to random men online, and I'm not interested in him. He said that my ex-husband must have mistreated me, and I must be a bitter woman, and he can love me like no other. At this point, it became so absurd and hilarious. I told George the next time he's in Brownsville, he can come take me out to dinner for a good steak and romance me. He proceeded to tell me that he'll be in Yemen for 2 more months' time, and then he will fly to Heathrow Airport. From there, take a train to my house. I'm not sure where he thinks Brownsville, Texas is, but I told him it sounds good and let me know when he's home. He asked me again for my phone number, and I told him no. George told me that due to his work restrictions, he cannot chat on the site. And I told him, well, you're chatting on it now. He said if his supervisor caught him on IG, they would strip him of his medical license. I told him, well, we can't let that happen, so goodbye and have a nice life. He replied very quickly to me, give me your number, dear. I again told him no, and said he can come on here to talk to me or stop talking to me at all. George told me that he would risk his medical license to talk to me because he felt that much love for me and that he would risk it all. I told him that's quite bold for someone who just met. He started writing and heart reacting on all of my IG photos. Some comments just said beautiful dear. Others were comments on my dog's photos saying lovely pet dear. I knew he was not who he said he was. I proceeded to ask him if he's a fan of 90 Day, and he told me that yes, dear, he was and enjoyed that hobby. He wasn't reading my questions at all. I asked him if he's a fan of Angela, and he said no, that I was the only woman in his eyes. He then sent me a few paragraphs that were copy-pasted about his job. Basically, he searched orthopedic surgeon, and the description online he copied and pasted it to me. He asked my job, to which at this point I told him that I breed cockroaches and train them to be emotional support animals. He asked me how much I get paid, and I told him I get paid by the roach and their abilities, so it depends. But the last roach I raised, named Harry, was a prize breed, so I sold him for $5 million to a rich oil tycoon. This piqued his interest even more in me. He told me that he was falling in love with me and asked me for my email address. Well, I decided to give him one of my throwaway email addresses, the one I used to sign up for coupon offers and stuff online. So it was basically a junk mail catch-all email address. I told George I had to go, but feel free to email me anytime. I logged off of IG and went about my day, amused at the chat, thinking how silly it was. I checked my email the next day and I was met with a long rambling email from George. Included in this email was photos of himself, or who he said he was, and a photo of his home in Dallas. I've enclosed the photo he sent of his home. The house I searched, and it was taken from a website written about Colorado ski lodges. Trust me, Dallas doesn't get 10 feet of snow. He then wrote a long rambling email about his longing for a wife and his work. I wrote back telling him his home is beautiful and asked if he enjoys skiing in Dallas. He replied nearly right away, asking for new photos of me that are not on my IG and photos of my business. He told me he loves to swim, ski, skydive, and cook romantic meals. He asked my hobbies and the typical boring stuff that these guys ask. I sent him photos back of my work with talented roaches. Included are the photos I sent him. And how I was busy training a new batch of roaches and I didn't have much time for hobbies like skiing. George kept up his email back and forth for a while, mostly filling the emails with generic romantic poems and ideas of love. I would always reply with something ridiculous. He would always reply with more love poems and how he was falling in love with me. This kept up for a few weeks, and George finally told me he was coming from Yemen and would fly to meet me. Again, he thinks Brownsville is somewhere in Europe, and that he'll come visit, and I told him I'll be waiting. He proceeded to show me a flight from Yemen to London's Heathrow Airport, and then he said he would take a train to see me. I can only assume, though, that he thought Brownsville was somewhere near France. I asked him if he has a passport, as my country requires a top-secret clearance passport. He said working for the Army, and suddenly now he's in the military and a doctor, he was able to fly to my location. During this whole time, he never once asked for my address. I assume he was just working up to asking me for cash and never thought of any of the details other than showering me with romantic poems and words. He was supposed to come visit me mid-May. Spring in Brownsville, I told him, the perfect time as it's monsoon season. He said yes, dear, and he couldn't wait to meet me. The flight info he sent me looked badly copy and pasted, and of course the train from London to Brownsville is what he said he was doing. 2 days before he was supposed to come and visit, he told me that there was a problem with his bank account, that his bank had a fraud alert on his account, and he was unable to secure his last contracted paycheck. He then said he was confused and didn't know what to do. I told him that's terrible. Maybe ask your boss for an advance. Well, he said he couldn't because if he told his boss he was talking to people online, especially admitting he was on IG, they would strip him of his medical license. He then asked me if I could borrow him $2,000 for the flight and travel expenses. He then asked me if he could borrow an additional $2,000 for travel. I told him to lie to his boss and just tell him that you need the money to go home and that you are not on IG or speaking to anyone. He told me no, as his boss, if asked for money, would investigate his browser history before loaning him any money. He said I was his only hope, and he bought me a ring to prove that he was sure that I would marry him and that I was the one. I told him to pawn the ring and use that money for travel. I'm sure you can get $4,000 for that ring. He told me there are no places to sell in Yemen, as it's dangerous and he needs to get out right away. He then decided to reduce the amount to $2,500. He said he was able to suddenly borrow money from a couple of doctor friends in Yemen. I told him to keep looking, ask for more friends, and if he asked each friend for $200, he'd have the money in no time. George became angry with me, calling me a wicked woman, telling me that I never loved him, it was all a game. I told him that I was going to send him $10,000, but since he called me wicked, we're now through. I marked his email as spam and then blocked him on IG. I soon started to receive email after email from various email addresses, but I never responded. Since the encounter on IG, I get flooded with messages from very similar looking fake profiles, or profiles with no followers. I had a laugh and wasted some of his time. They don't always get what they want. Story 2. I met Tony through a dating app. He liked my profile and started chatting with me. He said he was 48 years old and working on an oil rig. Now, I was aware of romance scammers, and oil rig always raises the big red flags, but I decided to play along and ask him in more detail who I was chatting with. Tony said he was a widow. His wife died in a car accident 5 years ago, leaving him with his only daughter, Emily, and she's 6 years old. I asked Tony where he was, what rig is he on, and he said he was in the Middle Sea. I asked him if that was in Middle Earth, and he said yes. He said he had a home in California but was away on the rig for 6 months. I asked him if he kept Emily on the rig and if she had arm floaties. He told me that his daughter was staying with a nanny minder boarding school in New York. I told him that was so wonderful, and all children should be at the International Nanny Minder Boarding School of New York. He asked me if I had children, and I told him yes, I had 11 of them, but I only knew where 9 of them were right now, as it's after 10 p.m. If you're American and old enough, you know what I'm talking about. It's 10 p.m. Do you know where your children are? Commercial from the 80s. He told me that I was a fruitful woman and asked how proud my husband must be that I was able to bear so many children. Well, I told him my husband left after I had the 11th child because we didn't have enough car seats and he was overwhelmed with cleaning all the food bibs. Tony told me that he was so sorry to hear this and that my husband must not have been a strong man. I told him no, that he wasn't. I always had to carry the grocery bags in by myself. He then asked for my phone number, and I told him I don't have a phone because of my job and location. He then asked where I'm from, to which I told him I live in Turkmenistan, and I don't have a phone. Tony said he was working underwater welding pipelines, and I asked him if his phone gets waterlogged from texting me and welding under the sea. He would just answer, "Yes, dear," and then continue to ask about my job. I told him I was a secret agent for the government and I couldn't disclose my location, but I would retire soon as my $100 million contract ended, and once it did, I would retire to Beverly Hills to live the life I deserve with a large swimming pool. This went over his head, and he told me that he was going to retire when his contract ended, but he dreamed of finding a lovely woman to settle down and marry. He said his son, note earlier he said he had a daughter, was sad that his father had no wife. I asked him how old his son was, and he said 14. I asked how his daughter felt, and he said, "No, I have a son." Clearly this was an amateur at work. He said he searched high and low for a genuine woman to be his forever love. I told him there are slim pickings in the sea. Tony again asked for my phone number. It felt like a broken record, and I told him the story of my homeland and how I don't have a phone. Tony then said he is on the rig and can't access his bank account and asked me if I could buy him a $100 iTunes gift card. I told him to buy one at the Water Walmart. He told me he can't leave the rig and he needs the card to continue to add minutes to his phone to chat with me. I told him to hold on and I'll pop over to the store and get him one. He told me he loved me and I made him wait about 20 minutes. I then sent him a photo of a used iTunes card. He thanked me and I told him I have to get to work. The government has called for a special mission. I then logged out of the site and stopped talking and didn't log in for days. When I finally logged back in, I had at least 20 messages telling me that the card is used, please respond. I finally replied and told him that I was so glad he was able to use the card. He kept telling me that I wasn't understanding him, and I told him that since we don't understand each other, we should just break up. I then reported and blocked his profile on the dating site. We'd like to thank these two ladies for sharing their stories of their funny encounters with a romance scammer. Oftentimes, we always tell you the best thing to do is just block, don't play with them, don't try to get chats out of them. But every once in a while, it is fun to kind of make them wait. If you'd like to share your encounter with a romance scammer, whether you sent money or you didn't, or you just had a weird or funny encounter with one, you can drop us an email, scammingscammers@gmail.com. We can verify your story, narrate it into a video. Maybe your story can help others or just give people a good laugh. Until next time, stay safe.